Without any further ado, we'll get going. So delighted to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Ursula Connolly. And Ursula is a lecturer in the School of Law at the University of Galway. And Ursula is going to talk to her experiences of open access in the field of legal scholarship. So I'm going to mute myself and give you the floor, Ursula.
Thanks a million. Appreciate that. So thank you so much, Liam, and to the organisers as well for inviting me to come in. Jen Smith is our open research librarian at the University of Galway, and she asked if I'd come along as I had come to her last semester in not quite desperation, but definitely massive ignorance, but with an enthusiasm for trying to get some of my own research published in an open access format. So if there are any difficulties with the slides or anything like that, I'll be relying on Liam to holler and let me know. But right, so you can see from the title, it's open access and legal scholarship. How hard can it be? So I have such limited experience of open access research or publishing, which is why Jen asked me to come, I think, so that I could give that perspective of somebody who was coming to it from the beginning and see, well, look, what were my experiences and what were the difficulties and the challenges and how have I been getting on? Because it's probably 4 or 5 months since we met. And so where have I got to in the open access journey? So I have titled this then A Personal Journey in 3 acts, because that's kind of where I am now. I'm in sort of act 3 of my experience with trying to publish open access. And as well as that, I thought midway that it would be useful for me to get perspectives from some other colleagues, because I'd been looking around the School of Law here in Galway and saw that a very limited number had managed to publish things open access. And when I first found, it's more complicated than I thought, I wanted to know how they did it. So I asked the one person I knew for sure had published a book open access, and her perspective was so interesting. I thought, well, I'd love to know what other people think. So I, instead of going to chat to each of them individually, I kind of conducted what I'd call this water cooler survey. So not quite a chat around the water cooler, but an efficient way to get those kind of water cooler perspectives. So that's what I'm going to share with you over the next 20 odd minutes, I think, that I have to present in around anyhow. So without further ado, away we go. We are in Act 1. So what was my first act? And I would classify this as naive optimism. And given that it's the Winter Olympics, I thought I'd borrow from the imagery of the Olympics. Now, this clearly is not me on a snowboard, because I can't snowboard. I can't even ski, in fact. But that's very much how I felt it would be. I thought, this is going to be so freeing. I don't know about other academics who might have joined the session, but publishing seems so restrictive often. Okay, there were the blogs and so on, but that's, not really considered that reputable. You want to have the peer review part of it. You want to be able to rely on the reputation of what you publish and what others read and what you read yourself, indeed. But it is very constrained. It's very time consuming. It's very closed off. You don't get this feeling that your research is being read widely in any case. Well, certainly I didn't. So this was my starting point. I had a body of research that I had completed, and I wanted to distribute that in the most open way possible. But obviously, I wanted it also subjected to the general rigors of academic publishing. So I believe in openness, and my particular brand of research myself is a lot about trying to bring about policy change. So for me, accessing the broadest audience possible was important. And of course, you can do that in other formats. But I also wanted it done through the academy. I wanted other academics to also read my work and be able to link in with them, or those who would access those things. And one of the outputs I wanted to produce was a book. And I also wanted that to be open access, ideally to increase the readership. And I had presumed, again naively, that the main reason I wasn't publishing open access already was because I hadn't done anything to explore how to do that. And I thought that, well, look, I have the ambition now, I have the body of research that I want to publish. I figured if I just get myself a little bit of knowledge about how to publish open access and I get going on that, that'll be enough. I'll get it out there. So I was then thinking in light of really two types of outputs. And one was a book, and I wanted that to be open access. It's a book I want to get into the hands of policymakers, academics, a broad range of academics, social scientists, plus legal people. So I wanted an open access book, and I wanted to publish over the next 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 good quality open access journal articles. So that was the initial ambition. So where did I go to from there? I went to where we'd encourage people to go, which is our open research librarian at the University of Galway, Jen Smith. Jen herself was a bit horrified that I had stuck a picture of her into my slide, but Jen, I hope you don't mind me saying, Jen is super enthusiastic, very, very knowledgeable, and she absolutely deserves to be on the slide at anybody's presentation, because without her, I would still be in that very frustrated and ignorant position I was kind of back in October. So I met with Jen and we chatted through how I would go about it. And I thought, well, I'll sit down with Jen. She'll tell me what the funding available is. I'll access that funding. I'll get my book published. I'll find a publisher and I'll use whatever funding we have to publish my book open access. And then the journal articles, same, it'll be fine. Now, I can't overemphasize how ignorant I was of the whole process. So I had zero knowledge. I think I might have done a little bit of digging around our own university website, but that was about it. So I scribbled down some notes at that meeting, and that's when kind of reality hit. Jen, as I said, was super enthusiastic and very encouraging of what I wanted to do. But it became quite clear to me that it was a lot more complex than I had first anticipated. And there were far greater constraints to publishing open access than what I had first anticipated. And the primary constraint appeared to be cost, certainly when it came to publishing an open access book. So I ultimately did feel kind of a little bit discouraged at that stage. I thought there was some chance for open access journal articles under that, the Irish Research e-library agreements that they have. But that itself seemed to be like you needed to get in there ideally in the first 6 months or the quota would be used up. I was surprised at how little funding support there was for publishing open access books. And yeah, that definitely gave me pause. So reality hit. I figured, right, I would have to curtail my ambitions or at least dig into it a lot more than I had initially anticipated. And by doing that, I spoke, as I said, to at least one colleague I knew who had published a book open access. And I'll tell you a little bit about my conversation with her in a moment. But then I thought it would be useful to go and find out, well, what were other colleagues' experiences? And I thought, well, look, I could do that just through casual conversations, but I thought it might be just more useful to do it in a more systemic way. So that was my act 2, try and figure out, well, look, what are other colleagues doing? What is their experience of open access publishing or open research? How do they feel about it? Did they think it was valuable? Had they come across, predatory publishing? One of my other colleagues had suggested I add something into the survey on predatory publishing, which I hadn't considered myself initially. I had gotten those emails too, pay me this amount to publish this, but I didn't really pay much attention to them. But I wondered if that was affecting the reputation of open access publishing more broadly. So in any case, away I went to try and find out what my colleagues thought by distributing this survey. So just a little caveat, a word of warning about this survey. I have 28 colleagues in the School of Law. It was 28 including me. And the response rate was relatively low. Now it says 11 there, but in fact, I think I've made a mistake there. It was 13. But in any case, in or around, at most, we have 50% responding, just under. So this is very much just an exploratory survey, effectively like a chat, but on paper. It's not definitive, but it did reveal certain patterns. So I think it might be worthwhile for us to try and do this again, but in a more statistically reliable way. So to get the ethical approval and so on, and to carry on that basis. So I think it is worthwhile us going back, if you like, to our colleagues within the university more broadly to find out what their experiences are. But in any case, we'll see kind of what came out of this survey, and some of it mirrors my own concerns, but I was surprised by some of the other findings. So we'll get to that now. So just another quick word on the survey, maybe. I had a mix of multiple choice questions and the Likert scale questions, and most of the questions allowed for multiple selections, so people could pick more than one answer. Right, so what did the survey find? So on that first question, my initial thing was to find out, well, did people publish any legal research open access at all? So have they published? Now, if you're good with empirical research, immediately you'll think, well, the people who responded probably, who even bothered to fill in the survey probably did have some experience. Surprisingly, a couple didn't, but as you can see, the majority responded did. I imagine my colleagues maybe who had no experience at all just didn't bother with the survey. So I think if you were going again, you'd have to maybe try and attract those to respond as well, because it might be a little bit skewed. But in any case, the vast majority of those who had published, not surprisingly, had published an open journal article. The minority had published a book or a book chapter. Now, I know for a fact one person who responded did publish a book. So, possibly the other one was a book chapter. And then you have a couple who have, the open access in a subscription journal, and then are just one journal article, so a number. But this was one where you could give multiple responses, so there might be a degree of overlap between them. But the majority of publishing experience are journal articles, something like that, and the minority are books or book chapters. And I think that is reflective of the barriers to trying to publish book and book chapters open access. So then, in terms of the barriers that were encountered by those who tried to publish open access, what were they? And one of the themes that emerged throughout the whole survey is reflected in that very last blue bar you see at the end, where 7 people responded and said journal reputation, and up at the top, publisher reputation for books. So reputation emerged as a kind of a theme, so a concern by academics of how they would be sure that what they were publishing open access would be considered, or perceived to be at least, as reputable as something that was published in the traditional kind of closed format, if you want to call it that. The other thing that emerged, which again isn't a surprise, is cost. So the article publishing costs emerges there as a barrier, and the lack of funding as a barrier. So intuitively, we would think, yeah, that's probably correct. I was surprised myself personally that reputation tipped cost as being a barrier to publishing. I myself personally was less concerned about reputation because, to my mind, the same rigors apply, but that isn't the perception, certainly, of other colleagues within the school. And it would be interesting to know if that is an issue more broadly, if open access publishing is considered to be less reputable in a way, and maybe less valued for the usual things that we want to get, like promotion and prestige and citations and so on. But you'd imagine for citations it would have to be good. In any case, I think there's a body of work to be done around that tension between a desire to publish open access and then the reputational concerns that people might have about open access publishing. So that brought me on then to the question on predatory publishing. So if people had experience of it, and as I said, it wasn't something that I personally had been that concerned about, but a colleague suggested I add this in. I kind of distributed the survey first just to a couple of colleagues who gave me some feedback on it. So a significant number, so the vast majority of people who responded had received invitations. As you can see there's about 10 people who had received invitations from predatory publishers. So this is kind of predatory publishers, I'm sure you're all familiar. They look for a payment of a fee to publish your output. And I didn't ask, but it would be interesting to know if this experience of predatory publishing is feeding into the reputational concerns. So are people concerned that people will think that they paid, from a predatory publisher as opposed to a reputable publisher, to have their outputs published in an open access format, as opposed to you haven't gone through the usual rigors of peer review and so on to have your article published. So a significant number had received invitations, and then a number of others had concerns but no direct experience. So everybody really had either received invitations or had concerns, even if they hadn't received invitations. So right then, so the other question was something I was interested in myself, is like, what motivates academics when they're deciding where they want to publish? And you see journal reputation way up there. And open access availability also, as you can see, was significant as well. So, there were 8 who considered that to be important when they're coming to a decision as to where they're going to publish. But look, reputation, suitability, yeah, you'd imagine that they would be very important. But open access availability was also important to the majority of people who responded to the survey. Now, again, obviously, if you engage with the survey, you probably are somebody who is concerned about that and interested in that anyhow. So I guess it's a little bit biased, the survey, from that reason. But at the same time, I think that is significant that you have, from the people who responded, an interest in being able to publish open access. So the interest is clearly there, but there are concerns. And the concerns largely seem to centre around reputation, and a barrier would be, we'll say, cost. So this question would be of interest probably to the open research librarians and also to institutions themselves, as to whether the service they're providing is something that academics are aware of. So if we accept that the respondents to this survey are a slightly biased group because they engaged in a survey in the first place on open access publishing, so, they obviously have that as something that's important to them or something they've been considering. So we take it to be a slightly biased or interested group. And then we give them this question about, are they aware of any supports that the institution provides? I was surprised that, such a number, like 6, almost half of the people who responded weren't sure. And there was definitely one who said that no support was offered at all, which is incorrect. The university does, obviously, we have an open research librarian, which is a significant staffing support, but there are also other institutional supports within the university. There's the agreements, of course, and there is the Office of the Vice President as well, that did have a funding scheme but doesn't appear to be active at the moment. I think they're reviewing it. But there are supports available, and that's such a significant number who responded to the survey weren't aware that the supports were there is a little concerning. So maybe there is a body of work to be done to get the message out there to make people aware of the supports that are available. I'm not quite sure what the best way of doing that is. Maybe going into the units themselves and giving presentations and so on might be one way, and that may well have been done indeed. But in any case, I thought that was an interesting result, given that we already have an interested cohort responding to the survey in the first place. So What then are the summary, if you like, if we were to kind of look at what that survey or that water cooler survey discussion reveals? So we can see that there is support, certainly among the people who responded. Oh, apologies. People who responded for open access publishing. So there is a support for it. People are interested in it. They want to do it. But that there are barriers to that. And some of those barriers, it seems the most significant, is concern around reputation. But there are financial barriers as well. And we see this kind of reputation bit coming out in that third one as well. And that there is this gap between maybe what is being said by institutions in terms of what they want to provide, support for open access publishing and so on, and the experience of respondents. So, we have that slide that shows how little awareness there is almost of the supports that are available for open access publishing. So I can understand being unhappy with the level of support, but thinking that there isn't support or not being sure of the support is a more concerning or worrying response. So there is something that isn't on the slide, but I think is worth discussing with you too. I hadn't put it in. There was one other open question, which actually was a very interesting question as well in the survey. I'm just asking if they had any other comments to make about open access publishing. And there was a couple of things that came out, or what would help you publish open access. Cost was a big thing. So again, just what was coming out in the survey anyway, reputation and cost. But there was another issue that was raised by one of the respondents, which I thought was also something interesting. And it was and it was related to cost, but what they were highlighting is that there was a danger that we were now going to amplify the voices or the research of the Northern Hemisphere, we'll say, where there was support, maybe more financial support for open access publishing, and that we would disadvantage either institutions or countries or jurisdictions where those supports weren't there. So that there was now in almost an imbalance. If we have certain parts of the world which more enthusiastically support open access, either through institutional supports of staffing and so on, or financial supports, that will disadvantage other jurisdictions or other countries or where that support isn't available. And I think that probably is a legitimate concern as well that we should be aware of. So that was my Act 2, finding out what was what other people thought. And now we come to Act 3. And the image, again, drawn from the Winter Olympics, but you can see there that's very kind of maybe a lot more modest cross-country skiing going on, where it's kind of steady, maybe a little bit more realistic in terms of what can be achieved, but still committed. I still fully believe in the value, obviously, of open access publishing. I'm still really keen to get my publications published in a way that they have the largest chance of being read, and also largest chance, therefore, of making an impact. So where has that left me? So my open access book, unfortunately, has gone by the wayside. I still prefer it as an idea, but it was clear to me that even among the university presses, there are really high book publishing charges. And I just simply don't have the resources for that. And institutionally, as far as I'm aware here anyway in Galway, there is no funding available that would help me publish my book, open access. There was one publisher, an open access publisher, very reputable, which could publish my book, open access, but it came with really significant risks from an academic's point of view, and it had a much longer publication cycle. So it would be at least a year and a half. And I could have been working on that because they could have accepted publishing my book open access in principle, but agreeing to it in principle wouldn't mean that they would ultimately publish it. And in fact, of the ones they agreed to publish in principle, you would only know 6 months later whether they were actually going to publish it. And that was only after you delivered them the entire manuscript. And they had told me that about 25% of the books that they agreed to publish in principle ended up being published by them open access at all. So you could end up in this quite a long cycle of having engaged with them, but they ultimately might decide, even after they receive the manuscript, that they're not going to publish it open access, and then you have to go and try and find another publisher who may have different considerations in how they want your book to look, or maybe just slightly what the focus would be. So I had to just abandon that. Now, I had mentioned to you that there was one colleague of mine who had published a book open access with the university press. So I had spoken to her about how she did it, and she said that she funded it herself. So she, in fact, paid the bulk of it, and there was a limited amount of funding that she got from her academic unit, which is within the School of Law, but a different unit. And I didn't explore what exactly that funding was, because I'm sure it maybe there was an element of flexibility in how they used that research funding. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and the book should have been published open access, because it's an excellent book, or a particular book that will have an impact in a very important area of the law. But the fact that she had to largely fund it herself is concerning. So I abandoned that. So no open access book for me this time, at least. So where does that then leave me? Well, I'm a little wiser, so I'm focused now on more achievable, but still reputable open access outputs. In other words, journal articles. I am still, very much in learning mode. I'm engaging all the time with Jen in the library, and I'm very grateful to her for the support she's offered, because, she's been keen to try and find as many potential ways that I can publish my outputs open access. So I'm aiming towards that. So I still intend to publish at least one article open access this year, and we're on track to have submitted it in time to maximise the chance of it coming under that Irish Research e-Library agreement. And of course, I know that I can put it on, in the university repository, that's fine, but I'm keen to have it published also by publishers, but in an open access format. So these are my concluding thoughts. I have found that open access publishing is widely valued within the School of Law, certainly by myself, but also by my academic colleagues. So costs influence publishing behaviour, so where people will ultimately end up publishing. And certainly for me, that was a consideration, particularly in relation to the book. Because if I had the funding, I would certainly be aiming to publish that open access, but I don't have the funding, so I can't. But in terms of my colleagues and what the survey found, that risk and reputation loom really large. And I think there is a body of work to be done. It may be exploring exactly what those concerns are in terms of reputation and in terms of risk. Is predatory publishing feeding into those reputational concerns, or is that coming from somewhere else? And how can we address it? The other thing that has come out, or that I've learned even myself, is that open access publishing is expensive, and it's uneven, it's patchy in terms of what can be published and where, and it definitely complicates the publication process. So the final thought then is that stronger institutional and publisher support is needed if we are really to truly engage in open access publishing. Where that funding comes from, how it operates, I'm less clear, but certainly it's needed if people are to engage with it as fully as we like. I think the open access policy bit has been taken care of. Yeah, we want people to do it, but the support part is not fully there. The other thing maybe just that might be of interest, well, certainly of interest to us in Galway, but maybe more broadly, is, are people aware of the institutional supports that are available? I mean, some are available, but it appears, at least within the School of Law, that there is a lack of awareness of the support that is available, even among the interested parties, the people who are interested in open access publishing. So thank you very much for your attention. That is my 3-act journey at an end, and I'll look forward to hearing any questions you have at the end of the session.
Thank you, Ursula. That was a brilliant presentation. I think a lot of what you talked about chimed with yesterday's talks from a couple of author experiences, but it was really interesting to get your kind of cohort of respondents, their views too. Like, you see the same barriers or perceptions repeatedly, but it's really interesting to hear your perspective. I'm going to move on straight into our second speaker, and we will come back to questions at the end. So next up we have Dr. Emma Dorris. Emma is Engaged Research Manager at UCD Research. She co-leads and manages the PPI Ignite network at UCD and is the author of the book Building the Ecosystem for Engaged Research. So I'll hand over to you, Emma.
Thanks very much, Liam. Appreciate that. Liam, if you wouldn't mind just sending me a 1 minute notice just to keep me on track, that would be great. Thank you very much. So I think coffee with Jens might be a theme running through this, because it was Jenny Collery of the UCD Library who invited me here today, and I'm really happy to come and talk today. And I'm going to take the approach to my presentation today a little bit differently than what I would often do. So I'm going to do it in two parts. The first part, I suppose, is my journey as to how I came to engaged research. And then the second part, I'll focus a little bit more on what engaged research is, because I am aware that it's still not completely well known across the board. So open science is what led me to engaged research. So my background is in molecular medicine. And as a PhD student and an early postdoc, I had a really broad interest in science generally and research generally. And open science was something that always intrigued me. But when I initially started, I thought that open science was more around technology. And I thought, because I wasn't a computer scientist, that it might be nice to follow what's happening in the area, but maybe open science wasn't directly for me. And it wasn't until I started to engage more and read more around it that I realized that open science is far more than just sharing data sets, and that it's a much broader approach and something that really chimed with me on a values-based level. So around the time I was starting to get more involved in kind of the open science area, responsible research and innovation had come through, which was very much aligned with kind of open science practices, and public engagement was one of the areas. And that broadening of research and the democratization of research was one of the emerging areas. And this is an area that I went, well, this makes sense to me, and this is something that I can actually be part of. So the journal eLife, which is a open science-based journal based on open science practices, and launched something called an ambassador program. So they were looking for early career researchers to join their ambassador program. So I joined that as one of the inaugural early career ambassadors. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were a global community of early career researchers, that being from PhD right up to 5 years of PI experience. That was how they had framed it. I was a postdoc at the time. And it was just a place where people who wanted to improve research could get together. They could propose areas that they were passionate about and see if they could get other people to join them to advance them. And that was a real game changer for me, because you suddenly had this support of people that perhaps you couldn't have been able to access locally. So there I am at the Open Science Fair back in probably 2017, I think, maybe a little bit later, but presenting on some of the work that we had done through the eLife Ambassador program. So we worked together, we published a paper on it, and actually even now I still work with some of the people that I was globally engaged with through this program. And back and forth, we've learned from people. I worked with people who, really focus on evidence synthesis and meta synthesis. Their area wasn't public engagement, but I was able to invite them over, share their knowledge with our community. They invited me over to their institutions, shared knowledge, and it was just such a positive experience of, that real value-based piece of research that sometimes when you're in a highly competitive field that academic research can get lost a little bit. And it helped to really fulfill my role and my work as a researcher. So what I started to do was bring more and more public and patient involvement into my research, because I was doing applied health research at the time. And I started to be one of the few people in lab-based research who was actively doing this. And what I noticed was that more and more I was being invited to conferences as a keynote speaker, not necessarily to talk about my research, but to talk about my ability to involve members of the public and people with external to the academic system with lived experience in my research, even though my research was not patient-facing. So a couple of exciting things happened in my research at that time. One of them was that our research, which was quite discovery-based, even though it did have an applied lens, led to the naming of a human gene, right? Really exciting something to happen, that your research, you find out the function of a human gene, and human genes are named after functions, so that human gene got named after your research. Super exciting, right? We even got a cake made, as you can see. The gene was called Macer. Another thing that had happened was we'd gotten a new grant in for a rare disease called CRMO. And it's a very rare disease, and there had been an announcement, about funding. And a woman whose daughter had this disease got in touch with me. She got in touch with me from the States. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She was just saying, it's great that you're doing this. And I said, thanks very much. And she said, do you think you'd be able just to put a little, piece together just to raise awareness about it? And I kind of thought, well, sure, okay. It's a bit of a side project. Got a bit of animation software, put a video together. Didn't think too much about it. She gave a few comments and review back, and I kind of went, okay. I don't know if this is doing much. About a year later, one of the clinicians that I worked with in passing said, oh, by the way, I meant to tell you, I was chatting to a woman the other day who said the only reason she got referred to our service was because she watched your video. Her child, who had been misdiagnosed for many, many years, got referred to the right service because I had made a video. I had never had that happen or felt that motivation from, although the other part of my research was really exciting, I had never considered the type of impact that simple communication driven by the needs of the end user could have. Even though I did it in some ways, I never really understood properly what that could do. And I still think about that because that is such a direct impact, even though it's only a small impact on that person's life. And that really started me, in combination with everything else that was happening, to think slightly different about where my career should be. So COVID happened, as it does. And one of the benefits of COVID was that it carved out a little bit of time to sit and think and reflect. And given the environment where I was asking to speak more about my involvement and how I involved people in research, the fact that I'd had this experience where I could see that actually it can make discrete impacts to individuals, it made me think, do you know what? Maybe it is actually time for me, even though I love research, to keep doing research from a different way, to enable and to try and enrich research, which is something I'm very passionate about. But maybe it's not directly through being a researcher that is the right area for me. So I'm very much, if you want to change a system, you need to understand the system. So I took the time and I went back and I did a part-time master's in public policy as I was trying to make this decision about whether I switched or not. Then the role of public and patient involvement manager, program manager at PPI Ignite came up, and I took that on and have been going since then. So that was part one. So that was how starting and having an interest in open science and having access to that supporting community really actually made a real significant change in my career and my life. So what is engaged research? Now I've talked about it, and I've talked about public and patient involvement, which is a linked term, but it has been, kind of 7 years later, 6 years post-COVID really, and what has happened since then. So engaged research is at its core the active collaboration and partnership between researchers and the communities that they say that they are studying or trying to serve. So the communities that are impacted by their research. It aims to address real-world problems by generating and understanding a research context so that research is more likely to be relevant and meaningful, and more likely to actually be translated into use for the communities which a researcher is trying to serve. In Ireland, in health and social care research, we call it public and patient involvement. There is differences between the two, but they are tightly linked. Under the engaged research umbrella, we have lots of different terms, and lots of different disciplines have their own terms. Because I'm the engaged research manager for UCD as a whole, I use 44 different terms when I am trying to do an institution-wide review of what's happening across the institution, because so many different disciplines use their own terms for it. But what's important is less so the term, but understanding what it is that we're actually doing. We're working with communities beyond research, beyond professional researchers, because they have additional knowledge that we do not. And by collaborating together, we can potentially have better, more relevant research. And there can be, in engaged research, lots of collaborators that may have real world knowledge. It may not only be members of our publics, it could be the public sector or industry, it could be broker groups, it could be lobby or advocacy. It all depends on your specific research and your specific research context. So when we talk about publics, what we really mean is not the general public, because in reality, there's no such thing. What we're talking about is initiatives that are targeted to communities based on their interests, their passions, or other shared circumstances. And engaged research can be a driver of impact. So this is about what change do we want to see our research make? And are we aware of who the key actors to make that change is? Because often as researchers, we actually don't have control over the change. We have control and ownership over creating the findings of those research and the communications of those findings. But it's often not us who are the people who take those findings and put them into policy or practice. And we can't expect that will passively occur. It's an active process. And if we have collaborated earlier with those stakeholders who are responsible for it, they're going to have more of a relationship to it and be more likely to actually translate that into policy or practice. So engaging with different collaborators allows you as a researcher to really focus on what you're good at, which is your very specific area of research, while leveraging what other people are good at in a collaborative way in order to ensure that research questions reflect real-world problems, can help improve the legitimacy and acceptability of findings, because if people have a stake and have trust in the research because they've been involved or they've understood it, or their trusted people within their community have been involved, they can perceive that legitimacy as being better than they otherwise would. And it also just generally helps with communicating those findings to the next person down the chain to get it to impact. And who can accelerate impact? Well, it's those very same people who have that additional knowledge about the context of your research. So communities can help be those communities that are in the public sector, communities within society, communities within the different sectors, and it completely varies depending on individual research, but they can help identify routes to impact that can be unknown by researchers. Researchers have their own specific lens and the things that they're worried and interested about, but there can be other ways to maximize the potential of your research that you simply have overlooked because you weren't aware. They can also identify alternative types of impact, and they have an authority of voice. which can be more trusted locally. So the person who is being impacted by the potential of the findings of your research has a stake. They are less concerned about the methodology. What they're concerned about is how that can improve their lives and how that can improve their livelihood. So they have a stake in getting those findings into use. And that authority of voice that they have, because it can have real tangible meaning to them, as opposed to the abstract meaning that sometimes it can have to a researcher, is really important. And we know from research that this is particularly effective when it comes to advocating to the policy sector. So this is just an example of a few of the different case studies that we have available from different areas. So we've one from homelessness, one around public health, we have one around far-right agitation, and one around working with survivors of the Magdalen laundries there. So these are just different examples from different discipline areas where an engaged research approach has been used and has been used in order to increase impacts that are available to watch at your leisure. And those videos, in addition to a variety of other supports, are available for anybody who would like to use it at our Engaged Research website. It's fully openly available there. These slides will be available afterwards for anyone who would like them. And a shameless plug there, as you mentioned, that if there is anybody here from research offices, because I am in a professional research support role and have been now for the last amount of time, building the supports in the ecosystem to actually allow engaged research to happen in a system that was not set up to have this type of engagement can be difficult. So we've put up some of our learnings together with my colleague Liam Clear and Thilo Kroll in this book here. Okay, and for anyone who's in the community centre, our good colleagues in the Wheel are a part of a EU programme that are developing resources for the community sector who want to get involved in engaged research. So that's it. I will say thank you very much, and I'll be available for questions at the end. So Liam, I'll hand back to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emma. That was brilliant. So interesting to see such a clear illustration of engaged research, the reasons for it, and how it can help the real world impact of research, and also the community engagement piece is really interesting, and extra marks for including a picture of cake as well. So I'm just going to crack on to our next presenter, and we then, as I say, we'll come back to questions for Ursula and Emma and Brian and Úna at the end. So our next speaker is Dr. Brian Ó Raghallaigh. Brian is Assistant Professor in Voluntary agus Scoil na Gaeilge here in Dublin City University, where I work. And Brian's talk is on open software, the Terminologue project, and I'll hand over to Brian now.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Liam. Thanks very much. And I'll just share my slides in 1 second. Can everyone see that now? And thanks a million, Liam and all in the library for the invitation, and thanks to the other speakers and to everyone in the audience. So as Liam said, my talk is about a piece of software called Terminologue. The talk is entitled Terminologue: From Terminology Research to Open Software. So I'll just be describing how we started out as a language group working on terminology for the Irish language in Ireland to software developers effectively, and making software available open source and hosted in a way that allowed it to be used by many internationally, well beyond the reach of our original project. So I'll just talk a little bit about that today. And as Liam said, I'm from Voluntary agus Scoil na Gaeilge, it's the Irish department basically in DCU, and I'm part of a research group that works on digital resources for the Irish language. So I'll come back to that just at the end. So my talk will be structured like this. I'll do it kind of in reverse, as opposed to describing why we created Terminologue. I'll at the start, I'll do that at the end. So I'll just describe what Terminologue is, and I suppose the ways in which it's been successful, and how open research or a kind of an open mindset contributed to that outcome. And I'll talk a little bit about just the statistics, the impact, and then I'll go back to the start as to why we created it and where to from here. So what is Terminologue? Terminologue is a terminology management tool for compiling and publishing term bases. There are other such tools in the world, but it just so happened that when this project, the National Terminology Database for Irish, started 20 years ago now, it made more sense to develop our own system. So that's how we're here today. But as I say, it's a terminology management tool for compiling and publishing term bases, multilingual term bases. We use it for Irish and English, but it can be used for any language. Its contributors are Meitheal Dúchas.ie, Dr Úna Bhreathnach, who's talking after me today, and myself. And as I say, I'll come back to at the end how it evolved and so on. But the point we're at now is that we have this piece of software that we use internally for our own projects, and that we've made available open source for others to use for similar projects and other types of projects. And then possibly most importantly, we've made the software available to use as an end user. So it's this last point here, the free cloud hosted instance. What I mean by that is that it's web-based software, and it's one thing to provide the source code for people to download and to reuse, but that requires a certain amount of technical expertise. So we went one step further and made the software available to use for people without technical expertise. So they can literally just go to a website and create an account and start using the software. So we did that by absorbing the costs associated with that into the project that we had funding for, and that we sort of sold it to our funders in terms of impact and engagement, as the previous speaker was talking about. So it's worked out really well, and I'll come back to that now in a minute as to how that's kind of had an impact. But before that, just to show you the system as well a little bit, this is the home page, the login page, and I've clicked on the languages drop-down list on the right there, and you can see that there are that the interface of this software is available now in 20 languages. And this is a direct result of the open approach that we've taken with this software. So by making the software available open source, by making it accessible to many, by hosting it in the cloud, and then by engaging with our users, we've gotten to a point now where we have a sort of a citizen science or crowdsourcing achievement where we've managed to attract users to submit or to contribute translations of the software. So as you can see, the list of languages is very kind of random. Like it's not major languages or European languages only. It's a proper mix, a random mix of languages, and that's a direct result of the kind of broad reach of the software and the community involvement and engagement. So yeah, so that's one of the most pleasing aspects of this work. The software itself then looks like this. It's web-based software, as I said. It allows users, it allows administrators to create term bases and then users to edit and publish term bases. And this just gives you an idea as to what's involved. On the left-hand side, you have search and browse functions, and on the right-hand side, you have editing functions. So you can edit the terminology entries, which are effectively concepts with terms in multiple languages, designating those concepts, definitions, domain fields, and notes, images, cross-references, and so on. And one of an important point really is our philosophy of creating robust, easy to use, user-friendly software. And in doing so, you attract more users and create more impact. And then just in terms of impact, you can I'll just talk a little bit about the usage statistics. These don't tell the full story, obviously, but they're interesting nonetheless. So this is a piece of software that started out on an Irish language project in Ireland, was made open source, and then was made available as a self-service website hosted by ourselves in DCU. And now we have over 4,000 users. So these are people who've created accounts on terminologue.org as opposed to people who've downloaded the software. And those users have created nearly 6,000 term bases. So, and each individual term base, if you can imagine, is a piece of work by an individual or a team that have created terminological entries in whatever languages. And then via Terminologue, they have the option to publish the term base as a microsite on the site. And so many of these term bases are sort of websites in their own right. And the hits are relatively low, as I say. Like 48,000 hits in a year is not particularly high, but it's not insignificant either. And as I say, some of these term bases are just kind of small projects and so on. So not many of them would be heavily promoted or anything like that. I've already mentioned the 20 user interface languages, which again is one of the major successes of this, I think, and sort of signifiers of the organic nature of this work, and the possibilities that the open approach allows and fosters. And then the many third-party installations. So this is harder to measure, but sometimes when users, third-party people or organizations download the software and install it and use it, they sometimes get in touch with us, and we have an interaction, and we have some idea as to who is using it. And then the 7 gigabytes of space, that's just the cost to us, like in hosting all of these term bases, as part, as I say, as part of another project that doesn't necessarily include explicitly this aspect of the project, but we've managed to convince our funders that this is worthwhile. So and then just another slide on the users. So this just again illustrates where we, going back to when we first made the software available on terminologue.org to today, and you can see just the steady growth of users on the site. So it's just very, as I say, we don't heavily publicize this aspect of our work, but it seems to have grown sort of organically. And some of that is via universities, other universities using it and using it as a teaching tool and a teaching and learning tool. But the word gets out, and as I say, the crowdsourcing or citizen science nature, or the involvement of our users in creating translations and so on, this creates this growth, I believe. So just a bit more about the impact collaboration and the open research, how the open research kind of brought that about, how brought this sort of impact and so on about. So we ourselves have presented about this software in academic forums, such as the EFT, MDTT, and EURLEX, various terminology science conferences. So as I said, it's not the only software out there. There's other commercial software and there's other academic software in this space, but ours sits somewhere there, and we've presented about it, and there's interest in it, and there's other approaches to the same thing. One, for example, there's another piece of software similar to this known as FAIR Term, which is very similar to ours, but would be explicitly taking the FAIR approach, the findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable principles, and their software is set up from the get-go to support those principles. Ours wouldn't be to the same extent. While it wouldn't be difficult to align it explicitly with FAIR, and we didn't do that. As I said, at the end of my talk, I'll explain how Terminologue came about and how we weren't taking that approach from the start, but we wouldn't be a million miles from that approach, and would be aware of those types of concerns. The software is also used in teaching and learning here in DCU and in a good few other institutions that we're aware of. This is courses in terminology and lexicography and languages and the like. the software is in use by government agencies, both nationally here in Ireland and internationally. We recently found out that the Irish government had been using it, but have stopped using it. And the main reason for this is that it's open source software. So sort of paradoxically, it's the fact that it's not commercially available or commercialized, which brings legal agreements, service level agreements, all of that technical support and so on. Because that was not available, which it isn't for Terminologue, they shied away from it, citing security concerns and so on. But it's more just the fact that it's not really set up for commercial use or even government use, but it is in use in some cases. We've worked on a major EU project for Irish language terminology for the EU institutions, and we've used this software. And we've been in touch with various commercial companies that use the software for their internal glossary management. So while it's not, as I say, a commercial software, maybe suitable for enterprise use, it's very suitable for personal use or internal commercial use, sort of semi-commercial. And there's a link there to a blog post which was written by a user of ours who translated the interface of Terminologue into traditional Chinese. And when he came to Ireland, he came to visit us in DCU because he was so enthusiastic about the software and how useful it was for his personal and professional work. And we were talking about engagement a minute ago. This was a very, very, very pleasing moment for people working on terminology software, which is a bit boring sometimes. But to have someone come and to compliment our work and to make the time to come in and talk to us about it, and then answer our questions for our blog post. So as I say, but one of the things he said was how useful it was for his personal use as a professional freelance translator and localizer. So it was very, very. I think he mentioned the ease of use, low cost, and so on. And I've already mentioned that point just about the fact that it's the open approach and the making everything available and easy to use and easily accessible has sort of empowered this the positives that have come out of this open research. So just coming towards the end, why Terminologue? And I've touched on some of this already. This started out as a project that started in 2005. We're working on it for 20 years. It's an important national project in Ireland. The Irish language is an official language of Ireland, but it's a minority language and requires support and maintenance. And one of the ways that's done is by providing supports that are useful to professionals who use the language and educators and students and pupils and so on. So one of the major components is that in that is terminology and making the terminology that's coined for the language available as widely as possible. So that's where the Terminologue.ie project, the National Terminology Database for Irish project, came about. And that's a project of DCU in collaboration with the Terminology Committee and First Nagaga. And it's very, very successful and very much a live project. But in the background of that project was the software that was required to run the project. And we developed that software here in DCU for the project. There was a number of iterations of the software. And then the last time we were rewriting the software, we decided to take this open approach and make the software open source. And we are now sort of realizing the benefits of that and how pleased we are with having made that choice, which, as I said, wasn't really at the time wasn't necessarily the done thing. It's more common now to be prompted by research funders and so on to make your as well as your data, to make your software and your methods and everything open. But at the time, it was kind of there was a certain amount of suspicion about making source code and so on openly available. But now it's clear that it's a better approach in various ways, in the same way that it is to make data sets available. And the software obviously facilitates users to make their data, the individual users who create term-bases to have the option of making their data sets openly available under open license. So yeah, so I'm looking at the time, Liam, it's 10 past, I should probably stop. So I'm just at the end now. So sorry, that's just a screenshot of the National Terminology Database, and you can see that it's linked to the European Terminology Database there. And finally, as I say, we're very happy with having taken this approach and with the impact that it has provided for us. But we haven't gone all of the way we could, we think. So it's not fully open source in the sense that we're guided by First na Gaeilge, who fund us, and they and software that's created for the National Terminology Database for Irish. So we aren't open for requests and issues that are submitted from the public. So we're not really allowing the software to develop organically. Obviously, individual users can fork the software and do whatever they want with it, but the main software is designed with one purpose in mind. So it's restricted to that purpose, really. And as well as that, it's our team is small, and we do all the development work in-house. We don't involve external developers and so on. So there is potential there to work to really fully open source it, but not for now. And then finally, I touched on it already, is the commercialization. We've looked at commercializing it, but for various reasons we didn't go down that road. But it could be done, and there would be some benefits to it. And then that's just GitHub, and that's our research group and other projects that we work on. So just a little plug, and I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. That was really interesting, really nice example of an open approach, I think, and really impressive kind of organic engagement with it that can come out of that approach to research. I'm going to move on to our last speaker, who is Dr. Úna Bhreathnach, who is Brian's colleague in Fiontar agus Scoil na Gaeilge in DCU, and Una's talking about another Fiontar project, Meitheal Dúchas, and I'll pass over to Úna now.
Thanks, Liam. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, grand. Thank you very much, as Gurmagat Brian. I'll be talking about another one of our projects here in Guish, Meitheal Dúchas.ie, and folklore, which we've been working on for the last nearly 20 years now. I work in Guish in Fiontar and Scoil na Gaeilge in DCU, along with Brian and other colleagues of ours. So this is all work that's done by all of us together. In fact, now, the Dúchas project, some of you will know it. It's Duchas.ie. It's a National Folklore Collection, which is a tradition archive in University College Dublin, a particularly significant one, I think, globally. Within the National Folklore Collection, there's a schools collection, which is a collection of folklore collected by school children across the 26 counties between 1937 and 1939, which is sort of a seminal piece of research done by the Department of Education, and along with the National Folklore Commission. As it was at the time, children were sent home basically to collect stories from their elders, and this was unbelievably almost saved, and it wasn't destroyed or lost over the years, and it's still sitting in UCD. We, as I say, we're a research group here in DCU that we develop resources to support the Irish language and its heritage, things like Terminologue, Dúchas, Canúint, and other projects. And the Dúchas project then, which is a collaboration between us and UCD, is a project to digitise the National Folklore Collection and make it easily available online, which we've been doing since about 2012, and there are various collections online and they're all available. The Dúchas project has been, to our surprise, a massive success. We thought it would be popular. We had no idea it would be this popular. These are the statistics for last year, for example. The number of hits is something like 7 million hits on the site, which makes us our second most important project after Terma.ie. And it's sort of different from Terma.ie in that Terma is very much a resource for terminology, whereas Dúchas is much more for research, for personal interest, for family history research, for research by school children, by others. So it's really very widely used. Obviously the folklore on it is bilingual. Some of it is in Irish, some of it is in English, depending on where it was collected. So, and that's reflected in the users and where the users are and the kind of feedback, the kind of emails we get. We spent a lot of time answering emails from people looking for various things. So moving on to Meitheal Dúchas, which is a sub-project, if you like, of Dúchas. We got a certain amount of funding from the department with the responsibility for the Irish language in 2015 to do a pilot project on this to see if we could get people to transcribe material. And the idea was to open the material for transcription. It's all scanned documents. The idea was to increase community participation in the project. We were particularly thinking of school children. We were particularly thinking of educational uses, and as well as that, to make the material more accessible. Of course, you can do this using handwritten text recognition, but it's not half as much fun, and it's not half as engaging. And there's lots of reasons why HTR is great, and we do use it in lots of ways. But I think that this has as you'll see, I think a use beyond that, and a sort of a value of its own beyond that. And sometimes the technical approach is not necessarily the best one. So this is what it looks like. It's fairly simple. There's your text there. There's a story written there. I think it's a poem, and you can write it in there. You can log in if you want to, and in that case, you get statistics on what you've transcribed and how many pages you've transcribed and so on. Or you can just do it voluntarily. So you transcribe what you see, and then at the back end here, we get those transcriptions. We have a quick look at them to make sure that they're not, Russian agents or anything, and then we make them available online almost immediately. We assume that there will be mistakes. We assume that people will make transcription errors. That's fine. It's a bit like Wikipedia. If you see something wrong, you can go in and fix it. And we assume that it won't be 100% right. But people have generally surprised us in being very, very careful and being very diligent. It's not the sort of thing you do because, for fun. It's not social media. It's something you do because you're interested in it. And as a result, we find that, a lot of the work is done to an extremely high standard. So it's simple, it's easy, it's openly accessible. And it's been a massive success. So it's been one of the largest folklore transcription platforms in the world. And as you see there, the schools collection, which I told you about, this collection that was done in the 1930s, has been completely transcribed at this stage. About 500,000 pages between English and Irish has been completely transcribed over the last 10 years by people who really got into it in a massive way. It's had a huge impact in the classroom. A lot of the schools where this work was done are still there, and a lot of the families are still there too. So people have great interest in going back and transcribing material from their own families or from their own school. It's also been used in education and teaching the Irish language, teaching folklore, and teaching Irish studies more generally. And as I say, it's been a sort of a hit, if you like, all over the world. We have, to a point, we've been very careful of GDPR and of not tracking people, so we really don't know who a lot of these people are. But we did do a survey in 2023 of what we call super transcribers, which are people who have transcribed more than 1,000 pages each, and you'd be surprised how many of them are. There's about 60 people who have transcribed more than 1,000 pages each. In fact, the 10 most prolific transcribers transcribed about 200,000 pages between themselves. So it's really not a broad sort of transcription project, but some people have gotten really into it and some people just do a few pages. So obviously we were dying to know who they were and what they were up to. So I won't go into in detail now, but we found that people were doing it for all sorts of reasons, because it's fun, because it's interesting, because it calmed the mind. Maybe during the pandemic, people got into sort of niche projects online because they I won't say had nothing better to do, this is important, but because they were stuck at home. People because it had ancestors and they were interested in what the ancestors were. So all sorts of reasons for people to get involved. And then we were interested in emotions as well. We were interested in, people were talking about passion and warmth and sadness and pride and as well as that grief. Maybe people had lost a connection with Ireland. There were people, for example, in the UK who might have lost that sort of natural family connection through whatever may have happened in their past. So people felt it bridged a gap. And as well as that, people find it funny. I mean, some of the stories are very funny. So this material, we've done this. The idea was always to make it useful. If people are going to spend so many hours transcribing, we need to do something with it. So various things, we will be adding it as a searchable corpus in the National Corpus of Irish. We'll be doing that in the next year or two. as well as that we're developing an API so it can be searched more easily. And then as well as that, we spend a lot of time fielding usage requests, this sort of thing. I'm a researcher, I'm working on this project about this, that, or the other. Can you send me a dump of the material from such and such a county or whatever? And we try to help people where we can within the limits of and respecting the material. And we have to be very careful because this is sensitive material sometimes, and the folklore can be sensitive. So we need to talk with our counterparts in UCD about that. But there are examples of publications. For example, John Creedon put out an Irish folklore treasury based, I would imagine, entirely on transcripts. So it is used broadly. It's also been used obviously by ChatGPT. We can now generate you your own folklore here about whatever you want it to be about. And again, it's obviously been used, the transcripts and the material itself has been used and extensively searched, leading to the site crashing on occasion, which is, I think, a common problem. Sample publications, people have been writing about in things like the Journal of the History of Dentistry, folklore, Études irlandaises, folklife, history of childhood and youth. So again, that link with history, with church history and ethnobiology and other things as well. But again, having a large searchable corpus created by the Meitheal means that this sort of work can be carried out. What we're going to do next, we're going to integrate this, as I said, into the National Corpus of Irish, which is another one of our projects. We're going to, we've also recently opened the transcript of the main manuscript collection, which is a much more complicated thing because it wasn't written by school children with teachers leaning over their shoulders, making sure they wrote it neatly. It's more difficult material and it's more adult material as well, but perhaps more challenging as a result. Another thing that will be coming up in the next few months is that on the sister site, which is Canunch.ie, which is a repository of Irish dialects, in tandem with RTE and now with funding from Research Ireland through Coalesce, we're going to be opening sound recordings for transcription, which is far more complicated, far more challenging, perhaps fun as well for the sort of person who enjoys transcribing and figuring things out. It's going to be available as well. And again, the idea will be to make this as simple as possible, make it open to people to just sit down and do some work on it without worrying too much about instructions and so on. That's it. I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'll leave it at that, but I'm very happy to answer questions. As well as that, I'll put a link in the chat now where you can go in and pick a random story and transcribe it yourself if you like. Okay, Gur Maggie.